If you're wondering which of your learning modules are performing well and which ones aren't, you might need reaction surveys. Today, we'll discuss how to collect and analyse learner reactions. This is Impact Champions. I'm Andy and I'm here with Dave. And this is where we give you concrete, actionable advice on how you can measure and maximise the impact of your learning. Dave, tell us about why reaction surveys are so important.
Yeah. So to start with, in case you don't know, reaction surveys are those little questions that can appear at the end of a learning module to tell you how much, or to get learners to tell you how much they enjoyed the course. They're really important because they provide a consistent way to measure the effectiveness of your learning content across the board. They're the single thing that you can provide that every single course can capture a score against, and you can provide a benchmark of how things are performing across the board. We basically consider it the single highest value thing you can do that's really easy to collect and analyze.
It's also where a learner probably they start to determine if this is relevant for them because they've just experienced something as an adult. They're relating it back to their own experiences in their own life. So it seems like it's a good time to capture that information as soon as they've completed a bit of training.
Yeah, that's right. You want to capture it as quickly as possible after they've completed the training, while it's fresh in their minds, so they can more accurately provide indication of how useful it was to them. Just one key point on that is you also want to capture learners who don't complete the training, especially for self-directed learning. You might have someone who starts a course and they get halfway through and they find it's not valuable to them, so they drop off and never complete it. Now, if you're only capturing learner reactions on completion of a course, this is a whole segment of your audience who aren't providing any feedback. And arguably, it's the most important segment because they're the ones who had some issue with the course and could provide the feedback as to what you should do to improve it. And you're just not capturing that at all.
Okay. And are we talking about reaction surveys to just e-learning modules and digital learning, or is this also for like face-to-face training and facilitator-led training?
Yeah, you definitely want to capture it for everything. An important thing to keep in mind is for something like instructor-led training, you'll probably ask a slightly different set of questions. Ideally, you still capture a score. You still want to be able to have some numeric value that you assign to all content, whether it's digital or instructor-led. But with instructor-led training, you have to keep in mind that a lot of that is dependent on the facilitator that runs it. And so you probably want to frame your questions to be more about how well the facilitator provided the information, if it was concise and to an appropriate length. And when it comes to analyzing it, then you need to understand that your scores might fluctuate a bit more with instructor-led training.
Yeah, and organizations love to be able to get that kind of evaluation form and like a lot of detail sometimes, so they can just assess the facilitator as much as they're assessing their learners. That's okay. So how do you go about starting to collect this data?
Yeah, well, ideally, your learning platform has it built in. And so you can just either customize or use an inbuilt reaction survey as soon as someone completes or drops off from learning. There are ways to do it if your learning platform doesn't support it. You can build a Google form or a SurveyMonkey and you just include the link at the end. Of course, then you require someone to click off to another browser tab and you might not capture as many results. So it's not as ideal, but if you don't have another option, it's a good alternative. And then in terms of like the questions you ask, there's a few different things you can include there. Generally, you want to have some kind of star rating. You could ask follow-up questions that are more specific about the content, or, I mean, that's kind of optional, or alternatively, just a free form text input for general comments and feedback.
You could also, I guess it's a part of incorporating this into your learning design as well. So is it something that can be just added onto something, or would you be able to create it as part of like an e-learning module as well?
You could build it into the e-learning module. I guess the thing to keep in mind there is because you do want the reaction survey to be consistent, you want to build the same questions into every e-learning module. If you're asking different questions, even if you're framing the questions slightly different, so you might ask, oh, did you find this content really enjoyable? Or did you find this content really engaging? And people are leaving a rating between 1 to 5. If you're just capturing those across different learning modules and trying to compare them, you've asked different questions, and so you're not really getting a like-for-like comparison. So whilst you can embed it into the learning content, it's better to have a standardized form that you just attach to everything.
Great. That's really good advice. Okay. So then that probably leads to the question of how do you decide what to ask?
Yeah. So you should consider what's really important to your business, what you're trying to get out of the learning content. So some businesses really focus on engagement or knowledge retention or conciseness of information. Generally, we advise a broader question, which is more encompassing. So basically just simply asking, how valuable did you find this learning content? And that kind of encompasses each of those different aspects into a single star rating that you can then compare across all your content.
Okay. So you said star rating. A star rating's the thing that you recommend, or what's the scales that people should be using?
Yeah, good question as well. So you can use different scales. You could just use a single like thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing. You could use like a 1 to 3 rating scale. 1 to 5 is generally what we consider a star rating, or even 1 to 10. The learning metric standards kind of advise 1 to 3, 1 to 5, or 1 to 7.
Mm-hmm.
The thing to keep in mind when choosing which scale to use is the more options you have, the more mentally taxing it is for the learner to consider which is the right option. So if you've got 10 points on your scale, you might make it just a little bit too difficult for them to decide which one, and they might not respond at all. Of course, if you have too few, just a thumbs up, thumbs down, you might not be capturing enough granular information about how valuable they found the content. So we generally recommend 1 to 5 as like a nice balance between those two options. And it's also something that everyone's familiar with. Like you put Google Maps ratings of 1 to 5, movie ratings 1 to 5. Everyone kind of understands those different points in that scale.
Okay. And one of the things that some clients and conversations we've had internally as well. So sometimes with 1 to 5, people tend to just default to 3. So therefore a 4-point scale is recommended. So there has to be a bias, a leaning towards some way, positive or negative. What do you feel about the neutral scale?
Yeah, it's a good point. There's definitely a period of time there where everyone was just like, get rid of the neutral option just because they thought everyone was just going to be a fence sitter and just be like, I don't like it, I don't dislike it. I'm just going to go 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. There's been research studies into this, and they've kind of discovered that that's not really a thing that happens. People generally feel strongly or negative, and they'll leave strong or negative ratings. If you and then there's also people who generally feel ambivalent about content, and you want them to be able to express that, because in these research studies, what they've shown is if you don't include a neutral option and people generally feel neutral about it, they're going to pick a side randomly, and then you'll get a bias towards positive or negative that doesn't actually represent whether your content is positive or negative. So, I mean, the science shows include the neutral option, let people sit on the fence if they genuinely want to sit on the fence.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to argue with science. So if science says it, we'll do it. There's the other question though, is you spoke of scales and even thumbs up and positive and negative and or like up to 10-point scales. What about leaving feedback and open text? That seems to be an option more and more nowadays.
Yeah, you pretty much always want to include a free text, short answer response. It's important to make that optional, because if you're forcing people to type a response again, they might just be like, too hard, not going to leave a response, and you don't capture it. For people who generally want to provide feedback, they have something useful to say, do want to include a free text response there. Try and capture that qualitative information about what they thought could be improved or what they thought worked really well, and then you can analyze that later.
Great. Okay, so we've gotten a scale. We know what the ideal scale is, where we're going to collect it. We've maybe even have some free text. So when is the best time to collect this data?
Yeah, we kind of touched on this earlier. So you definitely want to capture the reactions as soon as possible after someone's gone through the learning. So if they've completed it, pop it up right away. Just be like, okay, well, how did you feel about this content? How valuable was it? For people who don't complete, those self-directed people who drop off, ideally, your learning platform will have some kind of deregistration function where they start some self-directed learning. They're like, no, this isn't for me. I'm going to deregister. And that's an ideal time to pop up that reaction survey and just be like, okay, why are you deregistering? You didn't find it valuable, and like allow them to provide that feedback and review there. If you don't have that mechanic, like sometimes people just never complete and it just sits in their learning for months. I guess you can try and capture it like maybe 1 to 2 weeks after they've dropped off. You see they're not coming back to it. In that case, you might want to ask them, are you planning to continue this content? And if they say no, then capture that reaction survey to see why and get that feedback.
Great. Yeah, I think capturing the people who are not completing or having difficulty is as important or way more important than those people who are sitting there giving you 5 stars all the time. So then that brings to another point, like now you've collected all this data, and it sounds like it's great data that you've been collecting. How do you go about analyzing everything and finding the results?
Yeah, this was the one where probably a lot of people get tripped up on, because with a star rating, you see this everywhere, right? Just average that out. What's the average rating? You see on Google Maps for restaurants and things. All right, it's between 4 and 5. Like, you get this bias towards the positive, especially with organizational learning. People know their employees and that their ratings they leave are going to reflect on them as an employee. So unless you truly anonymize the survey, which I guess employees probably still don't believe that it is truly anonymous, you're going to get a bias towards that positive rating. So whilst average is useful for having one single number to compare all your content, you want to be able to look at it across a broader range of a scale. So the learning metrics, they basically recommend that you bucket things into favorable and non-favorable. So if you are using a 5-point scale, you would aggregate the 4 and 5 ratings as favorable and 1 to 3 as non-favorable. And that way you don't get this bias of just seeing a high score. You can look at the number of non-favorables collected. You can also just count up the number of ratings per each of those scale metrics. So you could say, hey, we got 100 5 stars, 50 4 stars, and 21 stars. And then that way you can see that there are 21 stars there and it's not getting diluted into a high average rating of 24 and 5.
Yeah, and a lot of people we work with, a lot of organizations, they have several thousand, sometimes tens and tens of thousands of employees. So that data can really be skewed. Like you said, it could be a 4.3 star rated experience, but it just so happens that in that group, there's a couple of hundred people who have all at 1 star, and we don't want to miss those people. We don't want those people to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the favorable versus non-favorable is like a really good way of analyzing that data.
I love it, and it's something meaningful again that they can bring back to stakeholders and show there's potentially some issues here.
Mm-hmm.
Once we have this data, how can we find out where the problems are?
Yeah, so assuming you're not getting 100% favorable on some learning module, you'll be like, hey, well, what do these unfavorable responses represent? You can look at the feedback responses. Like, you go through one by one and be like, okay, what are people complaining about? We do have ways of analyzing that with AI to help you pull out that information at scale. If you're collecting 50,000, 100,000 reviews, you don't want to be looking for those comments one by one. AI is really useful there. The other thing to bear in mind is when you look at those unfavorable responses, you should be segmenting them by audience or device to work out if there's some commonality. For example, look at all your responses segmented by department or position title. If you find that all the unfavorable responses are falling to a specific department, then it might be that content isn't relevant to them. They've been assigned the wrong learning. If you segment it by device, you might find that a lot of people on mobile are giving low ratings. And so that could be an indicator of some technical issue that needs to be resolved. And that's when then you might look into those feedback comments and be like, okay, well, what are people complaining about? Is there an issue here? You can also follow people up directly. That's an option.
Yeah, great. So then with Impact Champs and everything we talk about here, we relate it back to the business and the impact it can have and the meaningful metrics that a business can use to be able to make decisions or to be able to action things. So what's the relationship here? How is this going to provide impact for an organization?
Yeah, so firstly, you should capture business metrics if you can. So it's not a complete substitute for having some kind of business outcomes captured as a data point. So for example, if you're running some workplace safety training, ideally you want to correlate that with the number of workplace incidents captured and show that before and after the training that the incidents go down. Now, if you don't have access to that data, most commonly, this kind of thing is captured in some other third-party system that you can't pull in with your learning information. It's a different business function. You just don't have access to it. The reaction surveys are kind of a nice gap fill. So they provide an indicator that if you're getting high ratings, generally that the learners have taken something away from that they find useful. So in the case of workplace safety, you probably provided good information about how to register near misses and resolve incidents and that kind of thing. If people are giving low ratings, then it might be an indicator that, hey, there's nothing useful in this. Why did I do it? Why did we bother? And so when you don't have a business metric to correlate with, it's a nice, I guess we call it a proxy metric for the impact of that training. So generally that's why we find reaction surveys as being extremely useful.
It is difficult to get all the data in one place, as we said. So I wouldn't have called them a proxy metric. That wouldn't be my wording, but I understand what you mean. And I think that that's something that people can really glean a lot of information from. Okay, so basically to sum up, we're saying that collecting reaction surveys is a really important way to be able to start getting this meaningful data, collecting it at a really good point in time, collecting data that is using a scale, a 5-star scale is a really good way of starting. Other scales, depending on the type of content you're using. Free text questions as well can be possible. And then using this data to collect to be able to analyze, identify what problems might be occurring, and then with this data being able to correlate that back to business outcomes.
Yeah, that's right. And I think probably a key point there is just consistency in doing it across all your learning modules. So that way you can provide some kind of ranking of what's performing well, what isn't performing well.
Fantastic. So this has been Impact Champions. Thanks for listening. You can find more resources at impactchampions.net. And if this is something that you find interesting and you want to hear more about, feel free to subscribe. See you next time.